that's Barry, and that's Secretary Parkinson, and you got a full dose of the Dow. That was Roger. It occurs to me that if we had asked this group the question, name the major Kentucky industries. What are the top industries in Kentucky? If we had asked that question before this session, I suspect we would have heard automotive, we would have heard healthcare, we would have heard coal, agriculture, and all of that would have been totally accurate. I suspect we might not have heard tourism. And I hope that's part of the purpose of this is to raise up the fact that tourism is a Kentucky giant, but there is so much more that tourism can be and do for our state. If you stop and think why, as impactful as tourism is for the Commonwealth, why is there this somewhat disconnect in that awareness? There's some reasons for that. One is, here in other states, tourism tends to be viewed in snapshot terms. When we think tourism in Kentucky, we may think about the Derby, or we may think about the Kentucky Derby, Bourbon Trail, or we may think about our state parks, or depending on where we're from, we may think about the lakes and the lakes regions. The fact is, tourism is all of those things, and it's a great deal more. But that segmented aspect of tourism can keep us from seeing that totality of our industry. Kind of related to that, the tourism industry is made up of multiple industries, hotels, the full range of attractions, restaurants, our Convention and Visitors Bureau community. And again, that aspect of the segments of tourism can also blur the full view of our industry. Another factor is it's easy enough to count automobiles and trucks when they roll off the assembly line. It's easy enough to measure the tonnage of coal that's mined in our state. It's easy enough to know what the output is of Kentucky agriculture. But tourism, the output for tourism, it's visitors. It's people traveling to and within the Commonwealth. Visitors are hard to count. And that gets in the way of the full understanding and appreciation for the industry. And one other thing I'll mention is we all travel. Virtually everyone in this room, or everyone in this room, I'm sure travels for pleasure, travels to have those great experiences and that you bring home and we all bring home with us as long-lasting memories. Travel is fun. Roger alluded to this. Travel is fun. It's hard to make that leap from a fun business to a hardcore, big-time, bottom-line business for some folks. But that is exactly what tourism is. That's what this panel is going to be talking about. We're going to have a bit of a conversation up here, sharing our thoughts and our points of information with you. Then we'll get to some questions. And I'm going to start with Secretary Parkinson, with Don. Let's go right to it. We've already shared some numbers about tourism, but let's go through some of those again. Talk about the size and the scope of tourism in Kentucky.
Well, good afternoon. Tourism in Kentucky is the third biggest industry. It's about $14 billion. We employ about 185,000 people throughout the state in tourism. And the state tax and local tax is about $1.4 billion. So it's a big business, and it's a growing business. And we're counting not only hotels, but also all the state entities, the state parks, the horse park, and fish and wildlife, and all of that. It's a growing business. It's up about 5% this year. What's really interesting is that the hotel room tax, which funds the marketing for the state, is up 10.5% this year. I would like to take credit for all of that, of course, but I can't do it with a straight face. But part of it is low gas prices and the fact that 2/3 of the U.S. population is in a day's drive of the border of Kentucky. That is a really big deal. And so we have a lot of attractions in Kentucky. We have a great value. We're not going to Florida. We're going to the state parks or hotels around the state. So it's a great value. It's convenient. And we have a lot going for us. Not only bourbon and horses, but one of the real marketing challenges with Tourism Kentucky is there are so many different things to do. There's some gee whiz facts like, did you know that there are 10,000 elk running loose in eastern Kentucky? Most people don't know that. We have more waterfront than any other state in the Union except for Alaska. These are factoids we haven't really promoted, and we do need to promote a lot more. And so we have to increase our advertising. We have a little bit more coming up this fiscal year, but it's still not enough. Pigeon Forge has more than the state of Kentucky. We've got to find a way to increase our advertising dramatically more. Because for every dollar of advertising, we get back $15 in tax revenue. So it's a good proposition. In fact, we should stop having schools and just put it all into advertising.
Barry, I want to go to you. Delaware North, for everyone's background and information, major national company, great company, much of it based on and driven by tourism. The Secretary mentioned the jobs. Jobs. That's the base. That's the starting point and the end game for any industry. Barry, talk about tourism jobs. Tourism supports 186,000 in Kentucky. Give us the flavor and the scope of jobs in this industry.
Before I do that, I think I'm the only one working for a private company here, and I really want to thank Roger for motivating me to go back to my employer. And we also have a 100-year-old company. We've been in existence to continue operation with the same family for 100 years, motivating me to ask for 1 full week of vacation every year. So as we mentioned, we operate national parks, contract managed services, we own hotels, we own destination resorts. And as such, let me just give you an example of what a 200-room hotel could generate with respect to jobs. Okay, there's a general rule of thumb that a full-service resort, with all the amenities and food service, will create 1.5 jobs per hotel room. So this hotel would create 300 jobs. Out of these 300 jobs, about 40% of them will be management jobs. To put it in perspective in terms of dollars and cents, if this was a successful resort, it would generate, I'd say, $10 million in top-line revenue. Okay, so 30% of that, or $3 million, will be job creation. Out of that, about 40% of those will be salaried or management jobs. And they kind of represent a wide spectrum of skill sets, if you will. You need general management skills as your general manager, your head housekeeping. You need accounting skills to be the controller. You need sales and marketing skills, which Roger certainly has, to be the director of sales and marketing or a sales manager. So there's a large skill set. Out of those jobs, I was looking at what we pay in general ranges. The average salary would be about $55,000. There would be 2 of those that I would say could push 6 figures in your general manager and your director of sales. And that doesn't include your compensation, your benefits package. From the hourly positions, they would range from minimum wage, but more so up to $20 an hour. Because I think the perception is tourism creates low-paying jobs. That's really not true. And I'm not even talking about the tipped employees, but so from $10 to $20 an hour. You've all heard the expression, this guy started in the mailroom and became president of the company. In our industry, the same is true. Many people have started as a dishwasher and worked their way up to general manager, sous chef, executive chef. So these entry-level jobs, create some really good career paths. They create career paths like in culinary. You could start as a dishwasher. You could become a cook. You could become a culinarian, a chef. The same is true for the maintenance person, or the housekeeper. That could become the executive housekeeper. And also, there are good jobs in communities where you have underemployed, unemployed, or an untrained workforce. They could be very, very good jobs. And there could be economic benefits that local communities could contribute to bring the workforce up to a more skilled workforce.
I think the same thing that Barry and Don both said on these jobs, and everything. These are jobs that can't be exported. So these are jobs you can't take the housekeeper and put them in India. or you wait a long time to get your room made up. So the bottom line is it's very important. These are jobs that stay in the state, and I think that is such a critical point. And as I said, career jobs. Everyone I started as a lifeguard at a hotel and just kept going along. Fully 50% of all of our managers when I was in the hotel business started as hourly employees, as Barry just said. And so I think all of that is so important. So it's a great jobs generator, and I think we really have to, keep that in mind. And it also is a great way of attracting new business. I think you're in a great position here in Kentucky. I mean, my son just went to work for Amazon out in Seattle, and what he's paying for rent is staggering. The ability to buy a house, I'm talking about a shack, you're talking $400,000 or $500,000. So you have an ability. I think the tourism industry, people coming here and going, whoa, great quality of life, good cost of living. Maybe I'll put my business here. So I think it also getting people to come in here really feeds the economy.
There was something that I was thinking about as Chris was introducing us with Brown-Forman and all of the huge legacy distilleries, the bigs, and they're part of tourism. That means big jobs, big companies. But also think about the proliferation of craft distilleries and craft breweries. The point I'm getting to is that with tourism, it really generates, and I think you spoke about this in your presentation, Roger, it really it fosters small business. Small businesses foster tourism. Entrepreneurialism is I can't believe I got all of that out in one breath. Entrepreneurialism is just throughout the tourism industry. And so that's another dimension on the jobs. Everything from startups, small businesses, entrepreneurs, up to the large companies, and all the kinds of different jobs within that whole area. Roger, we've been talking a lot in this exchange about the sort of the economic aspects of tourism, the economic impact overall, the jobs that are created, a huge amount of local and state tax revenue that's generated by tourism, if that hasn't been mentioned. Get away just a little bit from that immediate economic aspect, and again, you touched on some of this in your presentation. There are these sort of secondary or byproduct, if you will, of tourism that it provides for a state or a city. Speak to some of those sorts of things. Yeah,
well, I think it does. It really brands a city or a state. Just listening to what Don said, he rattled off 3 facts I had no idea existed, and I'm in the business. So if I don't know the things that you just said, think of all the travelers. So I think it attracts a whole group of people, but then it also brands brands Kentucky, as whether it's Corvettes, Toyotas, whether it's outdoors, whatever, the things that you have and can totally brand an economy or a place to be. And what you have to do is in Kentucky is what's unique that Tennessee can't say, that Missouri can't say, that neighboring states that you own, and what is that? And drive that home, I think, and the people will love to come here. Yeah.
Right. And that's a great segue to the next sort of area to touch on, Don, and that is, and you were there. Let's go a little bit further with it. The attributes and assets that Kentucky tourism offers visitors. Talk about those. We are all proud Kentuckians, but from a visitor perspective, what are the biggies? And what, as Roger just referred to, what are the ones that are among the most unique?
Well, I think obviously the bourbon piece is unique, and we have 35 distilleries open. I think that's right in the state right now. I think it's 35. There are 2 more opening up, and there'll be more to come. It's just amazing what's happened because of what Owsley Brown did all those years ago. It's just absolutely on fire. You have the craft breweries and everything, but the water sports, the equestrian business, and we have not really played that as far as we can. We have this enormous horse park outside of Lexington, and it's only a shadow of what it will be one day. There's just so much opportunity. But part of it's going to have to be advertising that gets there, and part of it's going to have to be reinvestment in the park system and all that's going to mean. We have right now, something we ought to be talking about with P3, the park systems, we have 49 parks in Kentucky. The Commissioner of Parks is here right now, Commissioner Donnie Holland. He's with Leadership Kentucky. And what's happened over the years is that everyone in the legislature and government loves to open up a new park. It's a lot of fun to cut the ribbon, and it's been great. The problem is, though, now we have 49 of them. We have 17 resort parks, and they are very, very capital hungry. And we have not been able to keep up the investment that it takes to keep a big operation like that going. 17 are the resort parks, the marinas, golf courses, and all the rest. And they need capital. So when you go look at the entire scope of work to be done in the state, it's $241 million. There is no chance we're going to have $241 million to fix the state park system. So we're going to have to look at new alternatives, and part of that's the P3 we've been talking about today. If you look at what's going on in the state or the national park system, they need $12 billion. So they're looking at P3 legislation as well. So we need to get some work done in the parks. Fortunately, the governor and the legislature gave us some money when Donnie and I went running around the hall screaming for money when we first came into office because we needed some big money fast. We asked for $7 million. In the end, we got $18 million. So that'll be spent over the next 18 months. It's desperately needed for aesthetics, but also safety issues. So that's going to help turn the curve on sales in the park system. But we have to also have an honest assessment of what are we doing in the parks. Why would a state bureaucracy do food service and hotel management better than experts like Barry or Marriott or Aramark? What are we thinking? At one time when it was a depression, when these resort parks were built, is because we needed employment in America to come out of the depression. But that was then and this is now. And so we've got to look at this thing differently. And so having running businesses seems to me to make a lot more sense than a bureaucracy. When you have to go to Frankfurt to change the menu in a park, you got a problem. So we're going to have to get real here and start figuring out what we're going to do, because this ain't working. We're losing $40 million a year in the parks. And Donnie and I have been told that that's not going to happen very long with the current management, or we'll be gone. But we have to get this stuff fixed, and it's time, and we're working to get that done.
Thank you. And let's sort of stay on that track just a little bit. Barry, you can play bad cop here for a second. In terms of other challenges and issues, barriers, you see from your perspective looking in at Kentucky, what else do we need to deal with in order to more fully awaken this giant that we're talking about?
Well, I'm really excited about P3 because I think Kentucky, unlike other states, suffers from a process that's pretty broken, okay? How many of you work for a private entity that might respond to public RFPs? All right, not too many. Those of you that do, they will appreciate this. I mean, the procurement process, unfortunately, up till now in Kentucky and many states, has had a low bid process. And that's the worst possible process, in my view, for what we do in tourism. We need a process that gives me three things, or enables three things: creativity, flexibility, and the power to negotiate. And the current process does none of those. Now, you heard all that earlier in your first session, right? That's exactly what you want. And the other thing it needs to do is appropriate risk appropriately. So the process now, unfortunately, there's no communication, there's no even assessment of the scale and scope of the project. There's no pre-bid gathering of interested parties to understand what the private sector would be willing to contribute, and ideation on that part as well. And again, I'm not picking on Kentucky. That's why P3 is exciting. Because I think when you put your heads together, you come up with the best business solutions. And if we were to sit down with the state and have an open dialogue and be able to have a different process where we could create ideas and other companies could bring ideas to the table, you get a much better outcome that would be in everybody's best interest, and that's the public and the private sector, and you'd have a solution. I mean, this is no secret. The Kentucky Horse Park put out 2 RFPs before Secretary Parkinson's time for a hotel, and they determined it had to be 250 rooms, and they determined it had to have these features, that features, and this feature. So I just asked a question. I got these after the fact. Why? And somebody in either bureaucracy or politician decided that's what they need. Well, nobody responded to those RFPs because there was no dialogue. So I think that's really critical. Other obstacles we discussed are also opportunities. In our business, we operate in a lot of really remote locations. It takes hours to travel to these business days to get there. The Grand Canyon is the closest one. Sequoia National Park, Kings Canyon. So there are not large population bases around these locations. So staffing a hotel or a resort that I mentioned requires training, and it requires a labor pool. Often you don't have that labor pool, or you have to import some of that labor pool. And we look at employee housing as a very important element of what we do. That often doesn't get factored into the economic feasibility study, if there was one indeed at all, right? So those are some of the things we view as obstacles to creating a real partnership, which we like to have with our clients.
One other thing, I think,
Jump in,
up until April of this year, when they passed the legislation, Kentucky was the only state in the South, or even this part of the Midwest, that did not have P3 legislation. And so we've been sitting here as an island. And that's the bad news. We haven't gotten with contemporary programs. But the good news in all of that is there's pent-up demand. And because a lot of people want to come to Kentucky to invest, but it's been very difficult to do business with the state. So now with this, basically what P3 is says that Kentucky's open for business. So it's very, very good news. There's a lot of interest there. We have a stack of people who want to come either look at buying a piece of a park or building something on an existing park that we have, or maybe even other, like food service or whatever. There's a lot of interest in that. And they've already been to the other states, and now they're coming back to Kentucky. So it's very, very good news for us. We're very optimistic about it. It'll be probably the end of September before our regulations are done. We've had the public hearings, and we get ready to go. So in 3 months from now, it could be a very, very different opportunity for a lot of businesses and for new businesses and for existing. But we need to get people in here who are expert at running food or hotels or whatever it might be. So it's very good news. We're very optimistic.
I was sitting out in the audience, and I was looking through the publication the Chamber has on the table, and it talked about funds going to the pension fund. And I'll tell you a little story. There's a guy named David Bronner who is in Alabama. And David Bronner runs the pension funds for Alabama. It's one of the few places where one person has all the pension funds. Most states have 37 pension funds, or other firemen, the police, the teachers, et cetera. And so they have, it's one of maybe 1 or 2 or 3 pension funds in the U.S. that has no debt whatsoever, is totally funded. And so I asked him why. And he said, let me tell you a story. He said, we sit in a state in Alabama that everybody drives through and to go to Florida, and they go to the Panhandle. They drive through my state. And he said, I'm trying to figure out, how do I stop them? He's the only people who make any money are the gas stations and Stuckey's and McDonald's. He said, other than that, they want to get through Alabama as fast as possible. And he said, people with money, they play golf. He said, I know what we'll do is we'll take the pension fund money. And a friend of mine who retired from Marriott to go to work for the pension fund, and they're building these phenomenal resorts in this Robert Trenchone's golf. I said, the pension fund is paying? He said, I'm going to work for the pension. And so he built all these things. He said, golfers like to say, I played all the courses. He says, so not only do they come play 1 course, but they'll play 2, and now they have to come back, and they have to get a badge to pay them all. And he said, and it's created where all these golf courses are in underemployed areas where people need employment. We put all those people to work, and what a phenomenal way. So if I was sitting here in Kentucky, I'd be saying, how can I stop them from driving through? What's going to make them, and your Bourbon Trail, whatever it is, what's going to make people say, I want to go there, and not only do I want to go there, but I want to get around the state. And if you can figure that out, it's huge money in it.
Thank you. Some other things, just to make everyone aware of these things. Roger, you said in your presentation, it sort of goes from, instead of as goes GM, so goes the country, to as goes tourism, so goes the country. And there are some issues that are throughout the business community that also are very relevant to tourism. In Kentucky, we still have too many dry counties. We have too many still archaic alcohol laws. That is a factor in this state as relates to tourism, but also to other businesses. Broadband, cell service, internet access, problem for businesses across the boards. Still, definitely, and also a problem in tourism. So some of these things that really need to be addressed overall will benefit tourism as well, and vice versa. And I thought about that as you were talking about P3. Now, we may have things turned around with P3 where some good things can happen. Well, there's these other areas where good things need to happen as well. Roger, we're going to open it up to questions here in a second. Everybody, go ahead. If you've got questions, get to the mic. But more advice going forward. You know Kentucky very well. We can tell you're knowledgeable and you love it, kind of like we do.
Yep.
What's your advice for the industry and for the state to fully awaken this giant?
Well, I think you've got to tell your story. I think if I went around the United States and I said to people, tell me 3 things about Kentucky, they might come up with Kentucky Derby and bourbon, and they'd be stuck for number 3.
Chicken.
So, chicken. But you got to get the word out. So I think we've got to tell the story. We've got to tell a story everywhere. We were talking at lunch today of all the businesses in Kentucky. If everybody took it on themselves in their promotion, their advertising, to talk about a unique fact or something about Kentucky and spread the word. All your sales forces and getting the word out would be so important, because you're sitting on so much resource here that I don't think the country even knows about. And the opportunity, it's untapped as far as I'm concerned. And the other thing that's happening is tourists, especially international tourists, are looking for the authentic America. They want to go to Disney, but they want to see where's the culture, where's the background, where's the blues, where's the music, and all these kinds of things. And I'd play the dickens out of them. If you want to come to the real America, come to Kentucky. Don't go to Orlando. Don't tell Florida I said that. Okay.
Great.
Well,
Great.
I like that. Kentucky, you have wonderful assets. You really, really do. You have a lot of competition as well. Roger mentioned Tennessee, put out an RFP. Nobody responded to that RFP for all of their parks,
Right.
and you could select what you wanted. I think that was a little too restrictive, but you have tremendous, beautiful locations in the state. You really do. And when you mentioned marketing, we've had this conversation. I don't know if the secretary will share the marketing budget for all the state parks before he took over, but
Not good. I think it was, Kristen Branscom's here, who's the commissioner of travel. I think Parks itself was like $300,000. The state budget was only less than $3 million budget. Pigeon Forge is, I don't know, $5 million. Pigeon Forge by itself.
the resort I was referring to, my example, 200 rooms, if we generated $10 million, 8 to 10%, Roger knows, marketing budgets are going to go into marketing. So one resort alone, if the private sector were to operate, it would be spending $800,000 in marketing, as opposed to asking the state to fund that. So I think there's some big advantages in that regard.
And just in case anyone is wondering, what about the government role in tourism, and why are we talking about funding, and why, and I'll say this, why is Kentucky dead last in funding in the Southeast and in the bottom 10 in funding in the country? Tourism businesses promote and market and advertise their businesses like any other business. There is no one else that's going to promote Kentucky as a destination other than the Kentucky Department of Travel and Tourism. Just as there was this huge void nationally, there was no national tourism office until Roger got the Tourism Promotion Act through, finally, that created a national entity and a national drive. So just in case anyone's wondering why we're talking about funding and state government, that's the reason. I think, Karen, I know you're up, but I believe there's someone that got to the mic just before you, and then... Yes, sir.
Ladies first.
Oh,
Would you like to go first?
You're a Southern gentleman.
Thank you, sir. Gentlemen, hello, I'm Karen Williams from the Louisville Convention Bureau, and you somewhat took my question, Hank. But, Roger, you so eloquently talked about, and with the Kentucky Chamber, how tourism and travel touches everyone, and we don't say that enough. So my question is, and really a perfect segue from all of you, why does Kentucky have the lowest tourism budget, but yet I'd arguably say for all my CVB tourism friends, we have the best product? And I would really ask that to all of you. And Roger, and I know you talk to tourism agencies all over the United States and things that you can offer us, and I'm hoping this helps you, Don, because we need the money to get the message out there to help all of our businesses.
Yeah, I think it really gets to understanding the return. When Rick Scott became governor of Florida, I met with him, and I've known him in his former life, and we started talking with the Florida tourism people about tourism, and they had a $30 million budget. He said, I get it. I spend more money, I get more money, and it's a state that needs tourism. So he popped it to 50 million, then he popped it to 70 million. He just popped it to 100 million. So Florida spent 100 million. California had the biggest budget at 50 million. As soon as he went to 100, they're now at 100 and some. So you talk about being outgunned, but it's so important because what they've done is they've absolutely tied the promotion dollars to what comes home. And any business in the world, I mean, Delaware North would, they know darn well they open a hotel, they open a business, expert marketing, and it brings back so much, they'll do it all day long. And we've just got to get more thinking, and we've got to advocate, especially to elected leaders, why this is so important and why it's such an untapped resource and what the returns are, and really just keep selling that. But not just from tourism, but from every angle. This is why this is such an important meeting, because we've got to have a huge voice in Kentucky from every aspect we can think of.
Other comments on this?
Well, I think we do need to spend more money. I think in the last 3 years we had $9 million in marketing budget swept onto other projects. So it's in fact, instead of spending $10 million on advertising, it was like $3 million over the last several years. So we have to spend what we earn. Right now the legislation says it's 1% of hotel room tax around the state. That generates about $12.5 million. But that still doesn't get us in the game. We have to come up with other ways to increase media. We have to have more media if we're going to drive tourism. And so that's the challenge we're facing right now. But it is more than was last year. That's the good news.
There's a thought that I've had, and we can use this example in this state, I think, and that is if we all know that our coal industry is suffering. Not just people in the coal fields know that. People in other parts of the state know that, and they have an appreciation for that because they know that coal is and has been important to this state. The same with agriculture. There is, and now I think with automotive, we all get that those are industries that need to be supported and fostered, not just by themselves, but by government generally. That part has not broken through yet, I don't think, with respect to tourism. That's why we're doing this. And we encourage those of you from other industries who might now begin to get it to see tourism as that major industry that needs to be supported and fostered in the same way that many of the others are. Yes, sir, you've been patient.
Okay, get ready for this.
Hit us with your
I'm
best
John
shot.
Black. I live out in Oldham County. I'm the deputy county judge. Judge Vogel's not here yet, but he will be here tonight. But sometimes I get out and speak. He sometimes approves what I say, sometimes he doesn't. However, I speak my own word. But I'll start real quick. Secretary Parkinson says our parks are broke. They're broke. We've got 100 of them in Kentucky. If we don't do something, he's not even going to have a job. The best comments I've heard today thus far is from Thomas More, the guy from Thomas More, who said, quit talking about it, let's do something. Quit talking about it, let's do something. Now, that being said, you say, what does Kentucky not have that others have? We're building a 600-bed hotel down the street tonight. You bring folks into Louisville, Kentucky, and what they have to do. What they have to do is get on the bus and go over to Belterre and gamble. Now, if we want to do something in Kentucky innovative, I hate to say this, but let's talk to Donald Trump maybe he will come into Kentucky and buy one of these park systems, put a casino in here, build a 27-hole golf course, and keep the money in Kentucky. We got tourism coming in here because this gaming is a big thing. Let's get Bill Goodwin, David Atkinson, who I saw here today, get the chamber behind the ability for Kentucky to vote whether we have gaming in Kentucky. We're losing dollars right across the river tonight. I've got my notes here. So we're broke. Our parks are broke. We got beautiful parks. We come in here and take one park, do our P3 agreement with the Trump casinos or whoever it is. We do our P3. We get a cut of it. They bring something good to Kentucky. Now we've got another tourism draw. Kentucky versus Indiana. Donald Trump chooses Pence for vice president today. We're here talking about economics in Kentucky. Pence from Indiana. River Ridge across the river. You know what I'm going with. We got the Vice President of the United States in Indiana, River Ridge, our biggest competitor. We're all together in this southern Indiana stuff, but folks, we got to think for Kentucky. Lastly, let's keep the discussion going on. If we want our parks, we want 150 million coming in Kentucky to support all the parks. Maybe we could do it on a P3 and make some good places to come to Kentucky to do some things. Lastly, I'm not saying this is discussion for today, but I guess you guys, how important as you travel the world and the country is an NBA or a professional team important to Kentucky and Louisville to bring those things here?
I thought you had a professional team.
Don't go any further. Do not refer to whoever you were just referring to.
Hank, let me just say that we're a large gaming operator, and we'd be, you don't need Donald Trump. We'd be thrilled to take one.
I was going to say.
Bravo.
Actually, if you could pull out a contract, pretty much signed right now.
Thank you. Your idea was huge, really, really huge. Yes, sir.
Along those same lines, since the gentleman from Owensboro with the very nice coat, by the way, had brought this up, somewhat controversial though, if you talk about P3, we have P1 in northern Kentucky, the Ark, just opened. I'd like to know your thoughts about that because that was privately funded. There's a lot of misinformation about it, but it's projected to bring in 1.2 to 2 million people to the northern Kentucky region, which will then spend money at the aquarium, spend money at the horse park. They're packaging deals. So they've done this all on their own. So are we doing other things that aren't necessarily so controversial to bring in some of those tourism dollars?
Well, it's off to a good start. I think they had like 30,000 people in the first 6 days. The state has no investment in it at all. We have a tax incentive based on sales tax. So although it's been reported incorrectly in the media, there is no state investment in that at all. There is a tax refund, so for every $3 they get, we get $1. So we have no risk. We'd like to see them be very successful, obviously, because it's going to be a big tourism draw. And whether or not you agree with it or not, it's not really the point. The fact is there are going to be a lot of people coming, and they're going to be, their estimate, I think, 2 million. I hope they're right, because that means more money for the state. So, but there's a whole group of attractions there in northern Kentucky. We want to get signs near us so we can build more sales at the horse park. I mean, they're just, all of that, there's synergy to all of those things. So we hope they're very successful. It looks like they're off to a good start.
And it agreed with everything Don just said. I think your point is, though, about private investment, private development, and without there necessarily having to be a state or governmental connection. Absolutely, definitely, Kentucky needs that as well. When we look around and we see some of the huge destination resorts that are in Virginia and West Virginia and in Tennessee, that's something that Kentucky needs. And the state's not going to create that. That is where we look for investment, and we do look for incentives to that investment. But that is another piece of the puzzle of waking up this giant. I think, if I'm reading this clock down here, we're beyond time.
Sure.
So we'll leave it at that. Thank you all very, very much. This is a fantastic panel, and thank you all.